For years, governments have searched for ways to punish those who have committed the most heinous crimes. This video features the most shocking execution stories that will make your skin crawl. From ancient methods to modern-day executions that defy all logic, these tales are both horrifying and thought-provoking. Take Wallace Wilkerson, for example, who faced a firing squad of 5 riflemen, yet all somehow missed his vital organs, leading to his slow and painful death. Then there's Clayton Lockett, who endured a botched, lethal injection that failed to kill him promptly. These disturbing execution stories will make you rethink the death penalty and might even evoke sympathy for the worst criminals. So, without further ado, let's dive into these unsettling accounts. John Wood. He was convicted in 2014 for the brutal murder of his ex-girlfriend, Jenna Harris. The crime was marked by its sheer brutality and premeditated nature. Harris, a 28-year-old aspiring artist, had ended her relationship with Wood, which led to a series of violent confrontations. The relationship had been challenging, with documented instances of domestic abuse and restraining orders. However, Wood's obsession turned deadly when, on a fateful night, he broke into Harris's apartment and stabbed her multiple times. The crime scene was described as horrific, with clear indications of a struggle and overkill, suggesting intense rage and vengeance. During the trial, Wood showed little remorse, and his defense did little to mitigate the overwhelming evidence against him. Eyewitness testimonies, forensic evidence, and his own admission led to a swift conviction. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge handed down the death penalty, a decision that was met with both relief and trepidation by those following the case. Wood's execution was scheduled for early 2014 to be carried out by lethal injection, a method widely regarded as more humane compared to historical practices such as hanging or the electric chair. However, what transpired during his execution left a lasting impression on the public consciousness, casting a shadow over the perceived humanity of lethal injection. On the day of his execution, Wood was led to the chamber and strapped onto a bed. The process began routinely with the administration of a combination of drugs intended to induce unconsciousness, paralysis, and ultimately, death. Initially, the execution seemed to proceed as anticipated. Wood's eyes closed, and he appeared to fall into a deep slumber. But 11 minutes in, observers noticed a disturbing change. A quiver of Wood's lip followed by gasps for air, then another and another. The gasps grew into sounds of labored breaths, each one a jarring reminder that something was terribly wrong. The execution, which should have been a swift and relatively painless procedure, turned into a prolonged and torturous ordeal. It was suggested that a possible cause was the use of an untested or improperly administered drug cocktail. The drugs used in lethal injections have been a point of controversy, with many pharmaceutical companies refusing to supply them for executions, leading to the use of less reliable substitutes. This incident underlined the potential for error and the horrific consequences of such mistakes. The botched execution of John Wood reignited the debate over capital punishment and the methods used to carry it out. Critics argued that what happened to Wood was equivalent to cruel and unusual punishment, a clear violation of the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The visual and instinctive horror of Wood's final moments prompted renewed calls for the abolition of the death penalty and spurred discussions about alternative methods of punishment that do not risk such grotesque outcomes. Supporters of the death penalty contended that Wood's crime was heinous and that his suffering, while unfortunate, did not outweigh the need for justice and retribution. However, the harrowing details of his execution raised serious questions about the moral and ethical responsibilities of the state in administering capital punishment. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe the channel. John Lewis Evans III's path to the electric chair began in the winter of 1976, marked by a crime spree that would ultimately seal his fate. Alongside accomplice Wayne Ritter, Evans embarked on a 2-month rampage across 7 states, leaving a trail of armed robberies, kidnappings, and extortion. Their criminal odyssey culminated in the cold-blooded murder of pawnshop owner Edward Nassar, a crime that would not go unpunished. As the law closed in, Evans' capture was inevitable. His subsequent confession to the murder, along with a litany of other felonies, painted a portrait of a man beyond redemption in the eyes of the law. Despite his willingness to plead guilty, prosecutors sought a jury trial, aiming for the death penalty, which could only be imposed through such a process. The trial commenced on April 26, 1977, in a state circuit court. Evans, showing no remorse, admitted to the charge of first-degree murder. His brazen defiance continued as he claimed he would kill again under similar circumstances and even threatened to murder each member of the jury if they did not sentence him to death. It took the jury just 15 minutes of deliberation to return a guilty verdict. The death penalty was later upheld by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and the Alabama Supreme Court. The execution began at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. Evans was strapped into the electric chair, known ominously as Yellow Mama, due to its size and color. At 8:30 p.m., the first jolt of 1,900 volts of electricity surged through Evans' body. It was supposed to be a swift and decisive end, but it was anything but that. For 30 seconds, the chamber was filled with the sound of electricity and the sight of sparks and flames erupting from the electrode attached to Evans's leg. The execution team and witnesses watched in horror as his body convulsed against the restraints, his fists clenched, forming a horrific image of suffering. The first jolt failed to kill him. The electrode had burst from its strap, and a cloud of grayish smoke and sparks obscured his face. The smell of burning flesh and clothing filled the room, and when 2 doctors examined Evans, they found, to their dismay, that he was still alive. The electrode was hastily refastened, and a second jolt was administered, only to result in more smoke and the unbearable smell of burning flesh. Clemency was denied. At 8:40 p.m., a third and final surge of electricity was sent through Evans' body. 4 minutes later, the doctors pronounced him dead. The execution of John Lewis Evans III had taken an excruciating 14 minutes, a period that would be etched in history as one of the most gruesome and botched executions ever witnessed. While it's difficult to fathom the pain John experienced, it's equally challenging to comprehend why anyone would be subjected to such methods of execution. Execution of Clayton Lockett. As the sun dipped below the horizon on that fateful April evening, the walls of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary braced for an event that would reverberate through the halls of justice and morality. Clayton Lockett, a man whose crimes had sealed his fate, lay on the bed, the clock ticking toward the moment of his scheduled execution. The procedure, meant to be clinical and swift, was about to devolve into a spectacle of suffering and systemic failure. The initial steps of the execution seemed routine as the team prepared to administer the lethal injection, a method praised for its efficiency and humanity. However, when they attempted to insert the IV line, the first signs of trouble emerged. The doctor, aiming for the femoral vein in Lockett's groin area, was met with an unexpected spray of blood, indicating a struck artery. The scene, later described by the prison warden, became a bloody mess, a complete departure from the sterile finality expected. Despite the complications, the execution proceeded. At 6:23 p.m., the first drug, midazolam, entered Lockett's bloodstream. It was supposed to sedate him, rendering him unconscious before the other drugs could carry out their lethal task. 10 minutes passed, and the doctor declared Lockett unconscious, but the stillness was short-lived. As the subsequent drugs, vecuronium bromide and potassium chloride, were administered, Lockett's body began to betray the illusion of calmness. He jerked his head, his body writhing against the restraints. Moans escaped his lips, a haunting soundtrack to the unfolding chaos. Witnesses, their faces a mix of shock and horror, watched as the man who should have been unconscious seemed to be locked in a battle with death itself. The blinds were drawn in an attempt to shield the onlookers from the horrific sight, a clear reminder of the gravity of the situation in the execution chamber. Lockett had been pricked at least 16 times in failed attempts at IV insertion, leaving him in pain. The execution team's desperation was evident. Faced with the choice of attempting another line, the doctor decided against it. The correct needle was not available, and the one used was inadequate for the task. The state's investigation would later cite the failure of the IV as a critical factor in the botched execution. As expected, the execution was not going as planned. No life-saving measures were given to Lockett, the paramedics' testimony chilling in its finality. The corrections director, Robert Patton, made the call to halt the execution, but it was too late for Lockett. The aftermath was a fusion of legal and ethical questions. Lawyers filed court cases and documents to stop further executions, arguing that such procedures could be unconstitutionally cruel. Though sealed, the transcripts of interviews conducted by the State Department of Public Safety painted a picture of confusion and distress. A botched clinical execution is unimaginable. It's like doctors performing surgery without anesthesia, forcing the patient to endure the entire procedure. Now imagine an execution by horses. That would be truly horrific.